The intent is not to make things complicated, but like I oftentimes have to reinforce you can't have power without some level of complexity. The issue that we have is to try to hide as much of that complexity from you as possible. And I apologize for that because I can't quite figure out how to give you all this power without hiding, without exposing you to some of the complexity behind it. The other thing to mention is that it's not important for you to master everything and adapt in order to be able to use adapt constructively. There's a lot of stuff involved in it. You don't need to know every single aspect in order to be able to use it in your classroom. So there are two hands up. I'm not sure what's residual or what is a question. Dr. Camus, do you have a question? Or Kamau, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. Okay.
No question, sorry.
Okay. Yes, Tigran.
So another one question I have is like, let's say I give the students an exam in a depth. Is
Mhm.
there a quick way to like get their exams, like all their answers, like into your computer, like upload it? Just in case if there's like someone contests their final exam, it would be nice to have the questions and the answer, and the responses.
So when you say upload to your computer, I'm not entirely sure what that means.
So basically, usually when a class takes a course, right, they always say keep the final exams, right?
Yeah, right.
But what if it's online? So if they take the final exam online, let's say in Adapt, is there a way to upload the questions with their answers to store that just in case if there's the student contest later on?
Yeah, that was actually connected a little bit to the reset option. So we don't have a dump of every student's submission. Uh, we can build a database dump. Um, the question is uh, how to cut into it and use it productively. Because you'd have to come back and use adapt in order to be able to identify what things mean in the tables and all the stuff that's connected to that. And we don't have that infrastructure in place. So we can do simple things. So we can dump scores. I can tweak it in order to dump submissions. However, if you have your question to be algorithmic, so let's say you have something that requires 5 variables. Each variable you need to be able to save. So we can and we could probably do something where we can dump a like what would be a paper-based version of your exam. So here are the questions, this is what the student submitted. And then it's a PDF that you're able to review. And then you don't have to worry about the grunt work of the database and the variabilities and how it's stored and how to cut into it. That should be relatively easy for us to be able to do. Let me put that down on my to-do list. It's not going to be the top of our priority list, but it's not unreasonable in order to do.
Thank you.
And we'd probably expand that a little bit more, give you a few details about how many submissions they did and the dates and times. So it's more than just what you'd get on an exam. So you know exactly what they did and where they did it. Well, and we could get the IP address in order to geolocate that if that's a particular interest to you.
Yeah,
Okay. Any other questions, concerns? Okay, so we are recording. So where are we right now? We know how to create a course. Now we know how to import a course. We understand that what goes into courses are assignments. So that's what we want to be able to do right now. So here's the blank thing. For the course, chemistry is for lovers. Again, Virginia version. We have these two options, which are the same sort of options we had at the course level, new assignment and import assignment. But then we have two additional options here. One is the course gradebook that I can access, and the other one is the course properties. Now, we already went through the course properties and all the things like that, so we don't need to go about that. And the course gradebook is not going to look overly impressive here. I do have a FERPA option for being able to pull up an existing gradebook, but I need to log into my other account in order to be able to do that. I need to make sure the FERPA is on in order to ensure that no names and email addresses and things like that pop up there. And I'm willing to do that after lunch. But for now, let's just go with this thing. I can import an existing assignment. And if I click on this thing, and I don't, you don't have to do this, but you can do so. I can check an existing assignment from an existing course. Uh, so it requires two steps: identifying the course, identifying the assignment in the course that I want. Now, so in this case here, I can go through only my courses. I can go through the courses that are in the Commons, or I can go through the courses that are all public courses that are out there. If I select all public courses, I can decide that I want to do American Sign Language from San Diego College, and then I can choose hobbies and interests. Now, this is under the assumption that I know that I like this course. I've already parsed through it. I know that this assignment is one new. This is not something you do without paying attention to these things. No. So if I wanted to do, I could have imported this entire course and then peruse it in a more comfortable manner than what I did now. I can click on this thing. I have the ability to import just the properties of the assignment, which means here are how the assignment's formulated. This is where complexity starts to rear its head. Or I can have the properties and the questions that are imported into the assignment. I'm going to do that. I'm going to import it, and now I've brought in my this assignment, hobbies and interests, and import, and it has something similar to how the course view perspective. Here are the titles. This is shown or not shown. It's a homework. It's available on this date and time. It's closed on this date and time. It's closed right now, and the action items connected to that. If I click on here, it looks like this. It only has one question. This is probably a multifaceted question. That's H5P. This one here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 questions that are part of one question in Adapt. I would prefer this to be separated into 13 individual questions in order to be able to manipulate it instead of one individual one. But I'm working with them and another team in Fresno in order to be able to do something like that. So let's ignore that and go into a new assignment, which is the most important thing that we have here. So I'm going to click on new assignment, and it pops up with a modal that looks very similar to the modal that we use for a new course, which is not surprising. So let's walk through this in order to be able to. So I'm going to make a new assignment. I'm going to call it new assignment number 1. I have a public description. I love cats. I really don't. That's out there. Don't tell my wife. Our 2 black cats. She's quite fond of. Okay. I'm going to skip over modality. Again, this is the same option that we had in the course level in terms of whether you want it to be summative and formative. Does anyone want to actually define the difference between summative and formative for the class, quote unquote, here? Yes, Mark.
Summative is at the end, formative is while it's going on.
That's one way to view it. Is there a difference in terms of the um, keeping track of student submissions?
I would imagine that it would be, yeah, there would be a difference because if you were going to wait till the end for a summative uh, evaluation, that it would not necessarily need to be in real time with that as it would need to be for formative evaluation.
So formative is oftentimes contextual and ongoing. One of the bigger practical differences between formative questions and summative questions is that formative questions typically don't involve students signing in or keeping track of their submissions. So when you have practice assignments, those things are oftentimes formative. They're meant for them to evaluate it contextually as they're learning and learn from them, ideally. Summative is near the end. So that's what we would have if you want to test their understanding of things. And that obviously requires them to sign in order to keep track of their performance and use it as a homework system. So whenever we have an option between summative and formative here, we're essentially saying, do we want to keep track of the student submissions or not? Now, if you want to make an assignment that you want to embed into your textbook or questions from an assignment such that anyone can solve those questions, they would be formative questions. So that makes an engaging textbook that's out there. Its default is as summative here because most people use the homework system as a homework system and not necessarily as a learning system, although ideally both homework should be a learning experience. But okay, so anyways, I'm keeping this summative. If I hover over these question marks, it would say the same thing that Mark put out there. I can decide what type of group I want this to be connected to. Again, if this is part of your learning management system, if your course is already part of the LMS, this doesn't really matter, but this is convenient for us keeping track of things on our side. So I'm just going to call this homework. Now has this option of source. The source is either internal or external. Internal means that ADAPT gives the questions the students submit it, so it gets the scores from their submissions. External is I'm coming in and I'm giving it a set of scores. So for example, attendance. I might have some external performance I put in there. Or if I have paper-based exams, I will upload the scores manually in this way. This is used because I use, and many other people use, ADAPT as an LMS alternative where we actually store this stuff. Plus, it has some benefits that the LMS doesn't have, which was the topic of conversation before we had our break. So it's all internal. We can decide now if the evaluation or the grades are scores are based on performance or completion. Where performance is their performance, so partial credits and such is connected. Completion is if they actually submitted something, and then we put it in place. If you click on performance, it will start introducing this additional options, and these additional options happen in a handful of different parts in this modal. They're not shown to you because we don't want to inundate you with lots of options that may not be applicable. And you can decide about how you actually want to break these things up. If you have auto-ended or open-ended, your questions can actually be both, and how you want to break things up accordingly. I'm just going to keep it at performance because that's what most people do. Now comes points. I can decide if I want to have points designated at an absolute level at the question level. Question 1 has 10 points. Question 2 has 30 points. Question 3 has 80 points. Or I can decide that I want to assign points at the assignment level. This assignment has 100 points, irrespective of how many questions are in it. So if I have 10 questions in this assignment, each question would have 10 points. They're cut up evenly. If I have 11 questions, each question is 9.1 points. If I have 9 questions, each question is 11 point whatever points in order to be able to make sense. So it's set up like that because many while we may want to have different numbers of questions because of the levels of complexity and such per assignment, students oftentimes feel comfortable having them fixed a number of questions per assignment that they are put in place. So if I do set number of points, I can decide the default number of points. I just made it 10. You can change it after the fact. In fact, we probably don't even need this option on here, but we put it in there anyways. If I decide to make determine by assignment, I can then decide that it's 100 points. And that's set up there. I'm going to make it here just for fun. Okay, so now comes assessment type. So this gets a little bit more complicated because different uses of assignments will dictate different types of logic underlying how they're used. So the first one is real-time graded assessments. Those are assignments where students can submit and they can get responses back about their score after they submitted. It's real time. Those are really great for formative use so that students can actually use as practice, submit. Oh, no, it's not right. I want to come. Oh, it's not right. Oh, it's not right. Um, so hold on, Georgia. I'll get back to you in a moment. Um, if you do, so it may not necessarily give the solution out, and it may not necessarily give the answer out, what it would expect to, but it will give the response back if they got it right or wrong. You can choose that if you want to be able to do the other ones, by the way. Delayed grading, that would be something akin to offline homework. Students submit homework at a specific date or time. You grade it, you release it at a specific date or time, and then that's that. So students submit and they get no response back about whether they're right or wrong until I decide as the instructor to release it. So that's more summative evaluation at the end, while real time can be used very much in formative sakes. However, we do keep track of student submissions on both of them. Learning trees. So I mentioned learning trees a couple hours ago within the context of an adaptive learning infrastructure. Learning trees have a bit more complexity behind it than an individual question, and they require a bit more complexity in the way the assignment is used. We're going to skip over that for now, but I expect after lunch we're going to have time in order to go into the learning trees because we're going to have a bit of time. So clicker questions. Clicker questions are fundamentally different. I think it was Patricia that may have asked that question. You basically, as instructor, decide when the question is open and when it's closed, real time, and then you get feedback that you then show on the screen to the students. They can use their phones, they can use their computers in order to be able to submit and make that work. What I discovered at a conference last week is that there was an interest in order to make it geolocate so that in order to make it so that only students that are in the class are the ones that are able to submit in the class. Or when we submit it, we don't have this implemented, send to the students an access code that's on the screen that they have to access in order to be able to do it. So it makes it so that students can't be in their dorm room submitting answers to what should be real-time in-class participation. We don't have that baked in yet, but it's the thing that I learned at last week's conference. So as I click these things, I have different options that pop up here because they have different modalities and how they operate. Real time is easy. Real time should only be used with auto-graded questions. Does that make sense to you guys why that should be the case? Unless you want to sit at your computer 24/7 in anticipation of a student submitting an an open-ended graded question for you to be able to grade. In other words, if you want to be a little hamster ready to run in the little wheel when a student submits it so they can get real-time feedback, uh, you're not going to be able to do open-ended grading. So real-time grading should really be used only with auto-graded capabilities. Delayed grading is a different story. Because you're delayed, you have time in order to evaluate it, to grade carefully. If you have graders, it's their job in order to be able to grade over it, in order to be able to process it and release it at a specific date and time. And such. So there are a few questions that popped up before I start getting into these options. I think I can address them right now. So, Georgia, can the assignment point total be changed after creating the assignments? Yes. So I mentioned a little bit about database issues. So some of you may be exposed to this. So I apologize if I'm reiterating something or discussing this in a poorer manner than it should be. Once you actually create something, it makes a little table in the database. And as long as there's no entries in that table, you can dynamically change that however you want. So that means as long as you create an assignment, you can change all these properties. It's perfectly fine, as long as no student has submitted. At the point that a student has submitted, the assignment becomes locked. And many, not all, but many of these properties on here, you're unable to change. And we need to test it out to show you. We try to make it maximal so you can change many of the things, but you're not going to be able to change everything that's out there. The option would be, and we didn't implement it, is to allow you to wipe all submissions and then you can change it. but that probably is not going to be overly useful to you because that defeats part of the point of the homework system that we have. Okay. Garima asked, are there hints off of here? You'll see right here, can view hint. So that addresses explicitly that. Georgia, how do you have mixed homework assignments at both auto grade and PDF? If you have delayed grading, you can have mixed assignments. When it's auto graded, the students don't see the answer, even if it's delayed. We will evaluate it automatically on our side. We just don't release it. That's there. That right there is how you can mix the two. Learning trees are only auto-graded questions, and clicker questions probably should only be auto-graded questions because they're meant for rapid responses of concept tests that you're evaluating them, and not for them to be able to submit text off of it, although we could potentially do that for a post-submission review. So, Mohammed, you had your hand up for a moment, and then it went back down again.
Yes. Is it possible that if there is some mistake in the question and we correct it after the student have submitted and it regrade it?
That's something we've discussed. The technology exists in order to do that. We haven't implemented that. So that's what the regrader option is put in place, which we'll be discussing after lunch in order to be able to do. But it doesn't do it in the ideal fashion the way you described it, but it will at some point, probably somewhere at the end of winter at our current workload. Georgia asks, how do you, I guess I already answered that question. So back to what we're doing here. So if I push real-time grading, I have the option that says how many attempts do I want students to be able to submit. Right now it's 1 to 4 and unlimited. We should probably expand that to any arbitrary number for you to be able to put in place. You can decide if you want any of these numbers, more than one, if you want to add a penalty for submission. So if your pedagogy is such that you don't want students to be able to randomly pop numbers down, that you want them to be able to evaluate them before you do so, you can give it something like a 5% deduction. So they can't do that. That's especially important if you have unlimited, where they can just randomly throw in number after number after number in order to see if something works out right. Again, this is your pedagogy, how you want to be able to evaluate it. I have no opinion regarding what's right and what's wrong, because I think different contexts and different applications are applicable for this discussion. Okay. Delayed grading. Now, again, delayed grading means I have the ability to introduce open-ended questions. So I have the ability, in order to allow students to upload questions at an individual question, upload submissions at an individual question level. If I use only PDFs that are uploaded, I can upload a special compiled PDF option that then the students decide which question is on which page of that. And we have this option to do both. I'm going to be removing that. In fact, I was hoping it was going to be removed by today. So you only have these two options there. Now, the reason that we put this compiled upload happen was during the pandemic. Giving out exams, students wanted extra time after the exam to handle technology submissions, which made sense. Now, they would take pictures of their work, and then they would upload. We wanted them to make it effectively upload a single PDF, because that's what was generated on their phones. And then not have to deal with the complexities of which question, which submission, which image, and which involved a lot more time. And the students were already stressed out to begin with in their submissions, irrespective of the stressed out nature of running things during a pandemic. That has become less and less requested over the last couple of years, but we still keep it there because it's an option that some people may want. Now, I mentioned that open-ended questions can have a variety of different types. You can submit a file, you can submit a rich text, you can submit audio. We will implement it to submit videos. It's actually part of our discuss it question types, but this is just the default option that you put in place in terms of doing it, and you can modify this at the question level. So it's very similar to this default point thing right there. So I'm going to switch it to none. Learning trees have a bit more complexity in terms of how they're used. Let's discuss that around the context of learning trees. And clicker questions have something similar in terms of default clicker time that you decide how long you want the question to be opened up and such. So let's get back to real-time grading, and we have the ability there it is. Okay. There's a little sensitivity off it to decide if we want to view the hint. That might be associated with the question. And if you say yes, you can also decide if you want to put a hint penalty, if that's the paradigm that you want to, or the pedagogy that you want to use. You may not want to use it. You can decide if you want the solutions to be available to the students. So the way it works with real-time questions, let's say that I had three questions on here. 3 attempts that's available for that question as a student. I can click on the real-time submission and I submit it, and it will tell me whether it's right or wrong. And then I can submit it again, maybe with a deduction, because that's how it's there, and submit it again, it gives right or wrong, and et cetera, et cetera. At some point, if I want to give up, and I'd like to have a different term for this, but it's essentially saying I'm no longer, as a student, going to be submitting this question. I want to see the solution. Obviously, we don't want them to be able to submit after they see the solution, because they're going to get 100% on their performance after they see the solution for that question. So at the point that they give up, it closes that question, so students can't submit for that student can't submit for that question, and they can review the solution as necessary if I decide to provide it automatically. If I decide to make it manual, I'm the one that decides when the solution is available for the students. Even though the student's able to identify what their score is, they may not have the solution out there. That might fit in with my pedagogy in a different way than having automatic solutions out there. Okay. Delayed grading doesn't have quite that issue because when we release the scores, that's when we release the solutions and the scores and statistics and things like that that's available. Okay. Let's keep it as delayed. Now we get to algorithmic. I think this was one of the topics that someone mentioned in the chat here. One of the key powers that you have with some of the technologies in ADAPT is the ability in order to build questions such that each student will have a different question. Let's describe that. I'm not saying that each question is different. I'm saying that the numbers in the question, perhaps even other aspects of the question, will change from student to student. It makes it easier, or makes it harder to cheat, to quickly grab numbers from one student to another student, forces them in order to go through the work for their own individual needs. It also provides a mechanism in order to provide formative testing after the fact that the students can come in and get a new question with new numbers that they have to process and submit. However, making an algorithmic question is not necessarily a trivial process. It's not rocket science, but the technology needs to be empowered in order to be able to do that. So every single QTI-based question has no capability for algorithmic. And so the questions that you use in your learning management system, that's QTI-based. And many LMSs have started to expand beyond simple QTI. But QTI doesn't have the ability in order to build adaptive questions. Now, it's not rocket science to build it, but it's unique and non-standardized typically for doing so. So in ADAPT, of the 4 technologies, the technologies that are suited for algorithmic question generation is WebWork and iMathAS. That's because they're intrinsically designed in order to do mathematics behind the scenes, underneath the hood. And you build the questions such that you do calculations instead of saying the answer is 5 plus or minus some tolerance. It's a lot more work in order to do. We go through that effort so that you guys don't have to go through that effort. But it takes time for us to be able to do that. And my team has been steadily working on it quite aggressively for multiple years for doing so. And we'll probably be doing it for a long time because we have standards for our solutions, because we want them to be detailed and pedagogically useful. We want questions to be auto-graded. We want them to be algorithmic. We want it to be useful and powerful for everybody. It just takes time for doing. So just if I say yes, that will mean that that question, if it's designed to be algorithmic in this assignment, will vary for student by student. If I say no, even if it's algorithmically designed, every student will have the same question. There's going to be a third option on here that will be something like new algorithmic, which means that it will generate a new solution, a new question, but that question will be different from the previous course version of it. So that if you want to make sure that every student has the same question, because it's convenient for the way you do it, but you want that question to be different from last year's question, that mechanism is in place in order to be able to, that will be in place in order to facilitate that as a third option on here. Okay, so we're almost done here. Then comes late policy, which is the other annoying thing associated with that. So we have 3 general classes for late policy. One is do not accept late. That's straightforward. You have a start date and time, you have an end date and time, and after that end date and time is over, no one can submit, period. You have the ability to do overrides of these things, but let's just keep it as simple as that. You have the ability to accept late, but mark late. It's the same feature as do not accept late, except we allow them to accept late, and we just put a little asterisk into the grade book, and you decide what that means for you. I think Canvas does something similar, if I remember right. It's more complicated as if you want to accept late with a deduction. So if you accept late with a deduction, it gets more complicated because you have to give a deduction, a percentage. So you can say something like 5 percentage points are deducted once, for example, after it's submitted, or every 24 hours that you will put in place. So it provides a ramping down of available points. We will have sometime this year, and I don't have an ETA on it, an option for adding a floor, which means it's not going to be able to go to 0, but it might go to 50% or something like that. So there's always some incentive for students to come back and do that assignment, because if it goes all the way down to 0, then students just don't feel empowered in order to be able to do the question, do the assignment, even if it's long after it's due, because it just gets in the way of our educational mission. And that's it. The complexity that we have here is not necessarily this thing, is that we, as soon as we introduce late with a deduction, we introduce a second deadline. Because intrinsically, if we're going to be accepting students to submit a deadline, accept late, actually, and it's both of these things, we have a real deadline that students have to submit by. Now, that may be practical, maybe when we submit our grades, because students are not going to be submitting scores after we submit our grades. So that may be one aspect. It may be that you don't want to accept submissions 2 weeks after an assignment is meant to be due for one reason or another. So you can go about doing that. So that means that down here, when we have these dates and times, we actually have 2 due dates. One is the first due date, and the second one is the real final due date that you won't accept with. It's a bit more complexity. I think LMSs do this, but because I don't use LMSs, we tend to rebuild from the same needs. What's the term? Not comparative evolution, generative. Neil, you should know whatever this is. The evolution where 2 things develop from different sources.
Parallel?
There's something more specific, more than that term. It's like
Convergent.
Convergent. There you go. Bat wings and bird wings. They have the same functionality and structure, but they come from completely different sources. So, anyways, thank you, Jonathan. Okay, last thing, include in final score. This is useful for our mostly for our using Adapt as an LMS or without an LMS coupled to it. If I want to have practice or something, I want to have it completely uncoupled to the grading rubric and something like that. So it basically uncouples it right here. Instructions. So you can give instructions to the students on how to do it. Do these problems. That's not a terribly useful instruction, but you may have a problem set that requires a bit more complexity. Look here, review here, do something here that you can add down there. Okay, we're almost done. Random sampling. So algorithmic takes the same question and changes the numbers and the formulation of that question. Random sampling takes a pool of questions and grabs questions from that pool randomly. Right now, a normal random distribution, we don't do any other funky type of way of grabbing from the distribution. So for example, when I do my pre-labs, I have an assignment of 24 questions, but each student sees only 3 questions randomly sampled from that question bank. That is meant in order to evaluate, did the students read the lab report, lab manual. They're simple. They're not meant to be complicated. They are fundamentally different questions, but they are all roughly the same category of, did you actually read this thing? And let's check it out. And then if I do that, I can decide on how many randomized assessments out here. We are going to be expanding this. We were hoping this was done last week, but it should be done hopefully this week, where we can do random sampling at the question level. And this right here is at the assignment level. Notifications. If we have this clicked on, Adapt will send an email to students saying some period of time before the assignment is due, that's time for the assignment to be due. It's just a reminder. Students have the ability to decide when they sign in what that time frame may be. So it's set as 24 hours. Some students may want to have 36 hours. Some students may want 6 hours. Some students that live on the edge may want 1 hour. It's their prerogative. We don't get in the way of how they actually want to do their stuff. So if this were all homework, if these were all practice assignments, I wouldn't give notifications up because it's not meant in order for them to get notified when the practice assignment gets closed, because it's practice on their prerogative. Okay, lastly, we have assigned tos. Ignore this auto release. I mentioned it before. You guys don't see it on your screen, but you will see it soon. Assigned tos gives you a designation to say, well, everybody, this assignment is due at this date and this time, close at this date and this time, and then the final submission, let's make it, is that date and that time. If I decide that I have section 1 that wants to have that date, and then I have assignment 2 for section 2 that has a different date and different time, I can go about doing that. If I want to add for a specific student that's enrolled here, because it will show me the enrollment, I can say this student here requires extra time, so I can designate the dates and times for them individually in order to be able to make that work. With a large 550 student class, nowadays, it can oftentimes have somewhere in the order of 15 to 20 students requiring accommodations. I'm sure most of you have noticed that that's a different number than before the pandemic. And there are a variety of reasons behind that, which are not overly important for the discussion of making assignments. If I do everything right, I'm going to remove these extra assignments, make this for everybody, delete this thing out. If I do everything right, it won't tell me I did something wrong. And voila. Most likely what you guys want to do before we break for lunch is I need you to make an assignment going through here. And if you, and invariably you're going to miss something and it will come up with a little mark telling you that you did something wrong, and then you can go in and change it. So for those of you that don't have your hands up, start making your assignments, and then I can address the questions of those that have your hands up. So I think Ruth is first.
What often happens is we get the notification of accessibility for a student, a week into the class.
Yeah.
And suppose they, they're going to get, twice the time or time and a half, whatever. Do I then have to go into every single assignment individually and change it for that student?
Currently, we have it set up like that.
Okay.
We have talked about making some sort of global change that's on there. I am a little scared of global changes because we can get complacent with them. And
Right.
this is not something that we should screw up. We should, so I'm careful in order to be able to implement that. One of the things I wanted to be able to do was to do something along the lines of, well, this student needs 50% extra time, so that when you select the student, or it will automatically add them and put them down there, but it will require you to verify that that date and time makes sense, just because I'm a little scared behind. I don't want faculty to be complacent with what we are doing, because I think that it's
Right.
easy when you have all these numbers and everything moving around that you just you don't pay attention to them, and that can cause lots of chaos.
I know in Canvas, if you use new quizzes, you're allowed to, it'll show you all the quizzes and you can do it kind of globally for the quiz. If you're still using the old ones, as I am, you have to go into each one individually. And
Yeah,
change.
Canvas is particularly clunky in the way it handles its quizzes
Yep.
and
But
question banks and lots of things like that. So that's not surprising. We could tweak it up, and we're receptive. We have the ability in order to change things.
Mhm.
So if you don't like the way it's done, then let us know and we can change it, because it's important for everybody to be happy with how things.
right.
And that's something you're not going to get with Canvas, because they're not going to change anything, or at least not on
Right.
any time scale.
And I have one last question. We're building all this in Adapt and then linking
Yes.
to Canvas.
Yeah.
So when I have a student who needs, an extension or whatever, that I'm going to go back into the Adapt course and do it there. Let's see, it's a homework assignment.
Yeah,
I'm giving an extra.
I get it. So there's a bit of interesting complexities associated with how external vendors couple to LMSs with these things, because you have intrinsic dates on Adapt side and you have intrinsic dates on Canvas side, and they're not allowed to be coupled to each other via normal LTI.
Gotcha.
You need to have API in order to be able to process this. So, and this is where my memory escapes me, although we've had lots of discussions behind this. So I think what we did is we made the deadlines for one of them. When you couple your Adapt course into your LMS, I think we made it so that Canvas is open for the entire course, and Adapt is the one that dictates the dates and times.
Got
Or
it.
we did the opposite. I can't remember which.
I hope you did the former.
Yeah.
Just because that's what I'm used to, but
yeah,
that's fine. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what we came up with in order to be able to make it work effectively. Otherwise, you're trying to navigate two of them, and that they both
Yes.
make sense, and that's just basically
No.
unnecessary.
Disastrous.
But the API gives us the ability in order to force it, so we can actually make it so, and I don't know if we've done this yet, because there's a lot of unique things with the API that you can do without the LTI only interface, so that you can tweak it on Adapt and that it forces it to be changed automatically in Canvas. But I'm not sure if we've actually implemented that. So it's
Okay.
it's a bit of complexity in dancing. So just as a reminder about the complexities associated with these things. When we create technology, when anyone creates web-based technology, what they're doing is they're creating something and they're running it on someone else's technology, a web browser, which is then run on your own computer. And that means you have a chain of events that someone could break in order to be able to make the whole process happen. That gets more complicated when you have an external vendor going to an LMS showing on a browser showing on your operating system on your computer. And there are lots of little tweaks, and you need to be, so LTI 1.3 limited the ability to do stuff to your LMS, because your LMS is full of compromisable important data, student data, FERPA protected data. And it used to be in the past that some vendors used and harvested that data, which was really quite awful.
Yikes.
So the 1.3 gave stronger protections behind that, but that limited the control that we have in order to be able to do these things. So it's it's like square dancing with a lot of people with everyone who is different and doesn't know what a square is. Yeah. Plus, I don't know how many times people learn square dancing anymore anyways. So yes. I can answer those questions. I can get answers for you tomorrow if you want in terms of
Yeah,
how.
it's no rush. It just it struck me
Yeah,
as I'm working my way through this.
we've had discussions behind it. I just don't remember what the ultimate conclusion was.
Got it.
Yes.
Super. Thanks.
Garima?
Yeah, Dharma, maybe you already covered it, but just want to know that, let's say if the due date is already passed and you want to extend the due date for a particular student, is there any option of doing that?
Yes. And that's what I was going to start with after lunch.
Oh, okay.
So you
I can wait
always,
for that.
yeah, but I can mention it now. And so you always have the ability in order to change the assigned tos. So you can select this one student has a different time and date, and that usurps or overrides the everybody version of that. However, you have something on here called override. So this gives you the ability when it's turned on, and I'll show it on one of my courses, so students have to submit it. You can basically say this individual student for all questions or for the specific question then has the ability to be opened for a period of time or indefinite. So it's a real quick and dirty to be able to provide overrides of those dates and times, or allow them to do open-ended grading or nod grading. You can do a lot more finesse off of here than you can with just simple assigned tos.
Okay.
And this will make more sense when we actually see it in action when I show it to you in the other class, the other course.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Mohammed.
1 minute. Yes. You mentioned that there is a randomization in terms of sampling
Yes.
and algorithm. There are other ways. For example, if there are 20 questions, every student sees a different question. One student sees 20 first, another sees 15 first, like that. And option randomization. So there is A, B, C, and D option. Everyone see it in a different order. Is it applicable here? I mean, can be implemented in these assignments?
Well, hold on. I get a little bit confused. First, let me. I can mention this. You can combine algorithmic and random sampling together if you want.
No, my question
Yeah,
was.
I know. I just wanted to mention that they are not mutually exclusive. So right now it's set up that you select how. I need to change the point structure behind this. I can mention how many students get. I mean, you say how many each student gets this fixed number of samples from your pool. So you're unable to change that, how many they get. But I hinted at this, and this was a request that many of you may have already asked, and we had it. We have the ability in order to take a course, take an assignment. Let's say it has 10 assignments, and you can make one designated question that's a sampling question. And then you write down in that question which questions that you want to sample from, or which assignments you want to grab from. So you have a lot more control when we release this, which is probably going to be in a week, I think. So you'll be able to have more control over how many questions they see and which questions what questions they're able to grab from. And then we have to add a little bit of logic in order to make it so if you have multiple questions that they don't duplicate or do other things like that. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yes, my question was specifically in Canvas, we have the option, especially not for assignments, for exams. Means that if I make an exam of 20 questions, everybody is looking at a different question, one question at a time. So they look at the other person's screen, there's a different question. And within each question, if there are A, B, C, and D options, every student get it in a different order. Although the correct answer still is the same, but they get it in different order. That way, it helps avoid cheating. And
so
the last thing that you already mentioned, that the geo-based, that okay, the only student sitting in the room can take the exam. That would be a good option if it can be implemented.
Okay, so the default of multiple choice questions in QTI is designed in order to make the list will be randomized. You have to click a button in order to make it unrandomized. Any of those lists in WebWork and iMath AS can also be randomized. H5P, I'm not entirely sure of. They might be able to do that. I'm not clear about that. I have not had anyone request a reshuffling of the questions. So every student has a different order of those questions. It's possible. There's
Yes,
really not.
different order, and also if the option could be that they can look at only one question at a time, solve it, then they cannot go back and solve the next question. So that way, every student will be looking at a different question throughout the exam time.
Let's talk about this afterwards. I have not thought about this. It's not hard to do. I just need to learn a little bit more about if this is something that many people
We're just
would
kind of worried that like two students might sit down next to one another and like try and take the exam together. And if
right.
the questions come in the same order, then it
Yeah. I have no problem with providing an option to reshuffle the questions coming in every. But the issue of bringing it up and forcing it so students can't move back, I think might cause a lot of
In,
issues.
in Canvas and in Blackboard, these options are there. I have been using them.
I
Is
have
that something
found
that
that
other
that
people,
causes issues too, though. Yeah, if they
uh,
can't go back, sometimes it's an accident or something. But yeah,
right? I mean, you accidentally move forward. You'd have to have some sort of secondary confirmation. If you move forward, you can't go back. Is this something that I've never used anything like this? I think this would probably cause a lot of fighting amongst students, not amongst themselves, but with us about, oh, they clicked this, they can't read the question and things like that. It just seems like to me that that's going to be asking for lots of trouble. Is this something that other people would be interested in?
I use it to lock it so that they unfortunately can't learn from the test, but that I'm kind of make them march along. And I have misgivings about it, but I haven't experienced any negative feedback from it. But I'm open to uh not doing it, but I don't know what my original feeling about it was, why I did that. But I haven't had when I do use it, and I haven't had any problem with it.
Okay. It could be implemented. There's nothing really. Um, I mean, it fits in with the expanded sampling infrastructure that we have. I've just never had anyone ask this before, so and I would not intrinsically do that, and it makes it difficult for you to build uh, multiple questions that are connected to each other because you have to provide some opportunity of not randomizing certain things that build upon other things. So you start introducing a bit more complexity. It says this question, this question, this question randomized, these things locked together, this one, this one, this one randomized type of thing. And I'm afraid that that might be a bit more complexity than what the average instructor may want to do. But we can
I,
take a closer look in order to be able to see what we can do.
I think I
Yes,
was thinking about a phone tree that students may put together and obviate that.
A phone tree, is that what you said?
Yeah, where students taking the exam concomitantly would be able to call other students and then figure out from there what to respond to.
It's interesting. It's not hard. We can do it, but it requires a little bit of logic that I need to put in place in order to
when I
facilitate.
implemented it in exams, there were some complaints, but when I explained them the reason that it is to avoid cheating and explain that it applies to everybody, they were okay with it. And it actually helps in avoiding the cheating this way.
I can also see this as avoiding contract cheating, because one way in order to avoid contract cheating, like with Chegg I think Coursera does the same thing, is that if you limit the amount of time that students have access to the question, so they can't just basically at the start of the exam upload take screenshots and then pay people to solve the problems, and then at the end of the exam when they get the responses back, because typically it takes some time, then they can upload it. If you actually cut it down into narrower scopes, then it significantly reduces contract grading. So I can see this as a mechanism in order to help facilitate that. I need to think
Yes,
of
these were the reason for me to implement it. And I also face the problem that even with the password, student outside the classroom are taking the exam sometimes. So if the geolocation can be implemented, that also helps, especially for exams.
Yeah, the problem with geolocation is you can only use it with phones because of the GPS infrastructure. So IP addresses are not good enough in order to be able to use geolocations at the same level. So that's good with in-class clickers. I mean, you can have some sort of confirmation that the student, you give a code up or you have them sign in with the phone, that they then process that in some way or another. Um, uh, uh, it's still a new idea. I still haven't thought about that. But I understand that I may have to be a little bit more aggressive with some of the potential mechanisms that students use for cheating, because they can be quite impressive with what they do.
Creative.
And one last thing, the Respondus is a paid site, but if some campus has access, would it be able to apply on this test for adopt, because that also helps in avoiding cheating?
If what was that? I didn't hear the start of the sentence.
Respondus lockdown browser.
Oh, Respondus. I have lots of I have philosophical issues with Respondus and the way it operates. I don't think I'll ever be coupling to it. Uh, I just think that it's a little too aggressive and it steps into students' privacy rights a little too much. I'm not saying that I understand why it exists. I just don't like its solution. Um, the And there are lots of little things. I mean, you have to implement some pretty rigorous stuff, and it has lots of false positives. And you hear these examples out there. I really feel that there has to be better solutions out there than doing that. I don't have the solution though, but I understand. But I just I have some issues with it, so I'll probably never pursue that, just because it's my philosophy. So okay. Anyways, let's stop this conversation. Your goal right now is to create an assignment. I don't care whether it's real time or auto graded or deadlines or anything like that. I just want you to have an individual assignment that's new, pristine, empty, that we can then fill up with questions. That is what I want you to do before lunch. And lunch is basically immediately after you have done this. So right now it's 11:35. So I assume that it'll take 5 minutes at least before you guys, or at most for you to make a assignment up. And then we'll have a half-hour break. So let's get back here at 1:10 Pacific time, 3:10 Eastern time. And Neil likes UTC, so I'll let him throw in the UTC value that comes in there. And then we'll get going with actually a few properties associated with assignments that are beyond what you use in order to create it. And then we'll add existing questions to that. And then from there, talk about learning trees and moving forward. 4:10? Yeah, you're right, 4:10. I may have said 3:10. I apologize. So that's what you do, and then take a break. Georgia, your hand's up so I can address it while everyone else is busily creating assignments.
I just wanted to comment on Ruth's question about the timing between Adapt and Canvas, because I just did this with a colleague because I'm creating a homework set in Adapt through a grant at Clovis. And so everything is, I had to get it peer reviewed. So I had things set in Canvas, and I had set the dates wrong. And so the dates had carried over from Adapt into Canvas. when I changed them in Adapt again, it didn't automatically change them in Canvas. So I had to go back and change it in Canvas as well so that he could see the assignments and peer review.
Yeah,
them
part
for
of
me.
it is whether you are how your connection is.
Okay.
Did you do the API interface?
I don't remember. It was,
Did you have to manually create the assignments in Canvas, or did it automatically create the assignments in Canvas for you?
it created a link in Canvas to Adapt for me.
But did it create it for every assignment in your course?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, I can't remember if I had to do them one by one. I did this back in May. So,
Yeah, if you
I'll
did
have
it
a
one
look.
by one, you're doing LTI only, and then we
Okay.
have no control over dates. If you do it LTI plus API, the more powerful thing, which your campus has,
Okay.
it might be set up now.